Good morning. I call this hearing to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I would like to begin by noting some important requirements. Standing House and committee rules will continue to apply during hybrid proceedings. All members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these rules, including the quorum. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceeding, so please keep your cameras on. Also, remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevent them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceeding. With that, we're going to start with the hearing. Ensuring access to federal contracting opportunities is one of this committee's core priorities. Winning federal contracts allows small firms to create jobs, grow their businesses, and invest in their communities. That is why the recent decrease in the number of small firms doing business with the government is so concerning. From 2010 to 2019, the number of small companies providing common goods and services to the federal government shrank by 38%. This staggering decline not only hurts small businesses, but it also leads to less competition in our federal marketplace and less innovation nationwide. One of the primary causes behind this trend is the Category Management Initiative. Since its implementation beginning in 2016 to 2019, the number of small firms serving as federal contractors shrank by 17%. Category management is a nationwide procurement initiative that involves buying common goods and services as a single enterprise. It tries to make government purchasing more efficient, less redundant, and ultimately more cost-effective. However, the practice has produced many unintended consequences for small businesses. One of the most troubling consequences of category management is the reduction in the use of individual contracts in favor of government-wide contracts and those designated as best-in-class. These larger contracts are structured to serve multiple agencies and require businesses to provide an extensive range of products and services. As a result, many small businesses are at an inherent disadvantage when it comes to winning government-wide contracts. Yet the concerns do not end there. For example, these contracts last many years and essentially lock out those small businesses that are not included in them. Also, the costs and resources needed to bid on those contracts are substantial, and there are no assurances that the small business will receive an award. In fact, the procurement itself may not even come to fruition. This committee has heard from numerous businesses that invested thousands preparing for a contract that failed to materialize. As if this was not enough, government-wide and best-in-class contracts are relying on a self-scoring evaluation process that rewards those who come with vast experience, past performance, and certifications. Hence, only the biggest businesses or those that team up to collectively become the biggest can successfully compete. Given all the costs, hurdles, and uncertainty associated with these vehicles, many small businesses have been left wondering whether these are in best-in-class contracts or worst-in-class. Today, I want to take a close look at the challenges that government-wide contracts pose for small businesses and reforms Congress can pursue to ensure attempts to improve federal procurement aren't at the expense of small firms. I now would like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Lukemeyer, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we both agree there are many important situations in the federal procurement space that demand congressional attention. The issue we're exploring today rises to among the very top. Like Netflix disrupting the entertainment industry or Amazon fundamentally changing the way we shop, The federal government's use of multi-billion-dollar government-wide contracts might be permanently altering the way the government buys goods and services. It is important to keep in mind that these contract vehicles are not inherently good or bad. They are simply tools, and their use or misuse is what determines their impact on the contractor base. While I understand and even agree with the Office of Management and Budget's interest in maximizing cost savings and obtaining administrative efficiencies, there must be a thorough weighing of the balance. Choosing to procure with these vehicles must not result in devastating impacts to the small industrial base, a base which is, as this committee has long documented, in decline at an alarming rate. The Department of Defense recently released a report coming to the bold conclusion that contract consolidation in the defense industrial market is a national security threat, recommending that the agency prioritize engagement with new entrants and small businesses. Unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences of the rising use of government-wide contracts is the exclusionary impact this has on most small contractors and the ensuing negative ripple effect stemming from the loss of this critical cohort of business. Only a limited number of small contractors are awarded spots on these lucrative long-term contracts. This leaves the rest locked out of the lion's share of federal opportunities. No federal opportunity means no incentive to remain in the federal marketplace. The resulting loss of small contractors means less competition and ultimately higher cost to the taxpayers, less innovation, and risk of stagnation, as well, and may snowball into broader, more debilitating concerns such as threatening our national security and economy. High-stakes nature of these contracts also creates a whole set of issues for small businesses themselves. For instance, small businesses have only a limited pool of resources, thus these resources must be diverted either to create the best possible bid or to meet other business needs. Small businesses may further feel the need to expend even more valuable resources, protesting unfavorable contract terms or awards in order to protect their sizable investments, with no guarantee that the outcome will be in their favor. On a similar note, because these contracts are so sweeping in their requirements and highly competitive, many small businesses feel forced to give up their independence. Pressure to partner with large firms via joint ventures for the best possible chance of winning a coveted spot on these contracts. This presents a whole host of issues, including that many large businesses are essentially legally granted access to federal dollars dedicated specifically to assist small businesses. Unfortunately, it seems at this point, the genie's out of the bottle, and it's difficult to imagine a world returning to mostly individual, direct contract actions. However, we can be wiser, more thoughtful, and more intentional in seeking the appropriate balance. I will end with this thought. In the struggle to simplify and manage federal spending, the federal government should not lose sight of the importance of small businesses, nor should it disregard the impact that increased use of government-wide contracts may have on the industrial base. The federal government must do more to ensure the majority of small businesses can thrive in this new environment. Briefly on a separate topic, I'd like to note that another week has passed and Secretary Young continues to fail to fulfill her statutory duty and appear before this committee. Madam Chair, with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lukemeyer. I would like to take a moment to explain how this hearing will proceed. Each witness will have 5 minutes to provide a statement, and each committee member will have 5 minutes for questions. Please ensure that your microphone is on when you begin speaking and that you return to mute when finished. With that, I would like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Ms. Amber Hart, who is co-founder and co-owner of the Pulse of GovCon, an advisory firm in Sterling, Virginia, that provides business intelligence, information, tools, and data to empower government contractors. Ms. Hart is a federal business developer and has over 12 years of experience in all aspects of selling to the federal government. She is an active member of the Professional Services Council, the president-elect of Women in Technology, and sits on the advisory board for the Center for Government Contracting at George Mason University. Welcome, Ms. Hart. Our next witness is Mr. Isaias Sai Alba, partner with the law firm Piliero Mazda in Washington, D.C. Mr. Alba counsels clients on a broad range of government contracting matters before government agencies and federal courts, which includes overall regulatory compliance with the Small Business Administration small business programs. He also represents small and mid-sized government contractors looking to structure compliant teaming, joint venture, and mentor-protege agreements. Welcome, Mr. Alba. We really greatly appreciate your expertise on today's topic. Our third witness is Ms. Lynn Ann Casey, the founder and CEO of ARC Aspicio, Certified Women-Owned Small Business. ARC Aspicio is a consulting and solutions company that solves problems by applying integrated capability in strategy, design, data, human capital, behavioral science, and technology. Ms. Casey founded ARC Aspicio in 2004 and counts with a 29-year driving innovation for government agencies. Welcome. And now I will yield to the ranking member to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next witness is Rebecca Askew. Ms. Askew is the Chief Executive Officer and General Counsel for Circuit Media, and she is testifying on behalf of the Women's Procurement Circle. Having been founded 16 years ago, Circuit Media is a government contracting small business that specializes in creative services, staffing, and communications. With offices in Colorado and Washington, D.C., Circuit Media and Ms. Askew are premier participants of the SBA's contracting programs. Ms. Askew, thank you for once again testifying before this committee and for your participation today. Also like to thank all the witnesses for being here today and joining us, and look forward to your conversation and discussion. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lukemeyer. Ms. Hart, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Velasquez, Ranking Member Lukemeyer, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Amber Hart, and I am the co-founder and co-owner of the Pulse of GovCon. The Pulse of GovCon is a self-funded, woman-owned small business focused on empowering government contractors. We break down barriers across the contracting ecosystem and bridge the fundamental gaps surrounding federal procurement. Our day-to-day involvement has allowed us to not only observe the impacts of government-wide contracts on our small business clients, but to actively participate in the realities of strategic sourcing and bear the brunt of its unintended consequences. In a world of uncertainties, small businesses just want clarity by way of clear, concise, and consistent regulations to ensure compliance. However, mixed messages and the usage of these procurement vehicles meant to simplify acquisition have resulted in increased challenges for small businesses. With limited resources and intense demands on time and money in the bidding process, contract cancellations can be catastrophic to small firms that have dedicated months and years to the process. Vague contract vehicles with never-ending technical functional areas often devolve into protests with very little funding, making it to small businesses. This creates two distinct consequences. First, the bundling and consolidation required by category management has required the industry to buy or be bought. Companies now must acquire their competitors to scale at a meaningful pace or buy into a sector to increase revenue. This increase in merger and acquisition activity has certainly reduced the number of small businesses eligible for prime contracts. Second, in the end, it's likely that the same vendors will be on GSA Polaris, HHS CIOSP4, and GSA 8A Stars 3 due to little to no difference between the focus areas of the vehicles. As a result, the government will not gain access to a wide range of solutions and services from wider federal marketplace. At its core, strategic sourcing initiatives minimize channels for acquisition and reduce lanes where contractors can supply services and products. Since its establishment in fiscal year 16, category management has resulted in a 26% decrease in small business utilization across best-in-class contracts. This is identical to its precursor, which shrunk the office supplies industrial base by 26% over 6 years. Furthermore, the number of small business awards under best-in-class contracts and category management has decreased by 22% over the past 6 fiscal years. Simply put, small business dollars have increased, but have been consolidated into a shrinking competition pool with fewer vendors and even less contract opportunities. Under category management, government-wide acquisition contracts serve as the motivating force through the utilization of best-in-class solutions. One of the most important pieces of the best-in-class criteria is having rigorous requirement definitions and planning processes. However, most best-in-class contracts are now being created to support the broadest spectrum possible, resulting in requirements gymnastics for small business bidders. For example, GSA Polaris contract is supposed to serve as GSA's future small business GWAC to deliver complex IT services. Many performance areas laid out in the final RFP do encompass these types of requirements, including cloud services, cybersecurity, and system design. However, the RFP also lists out ancillary support services, including construction, which does not constitute complex IT. Standardization of best-in-class criteria, how it's managed, and how small business contractors get a seat on these vehicles is of critical importance. This includes establishing individual definitions for the federal, civilian, and defense markets. Current best-in-class contracts are all over the map when it comes to important small business factors like size standard recertification, bid requirements, experience qualifications, ramping timelines and procedures, and how set-asides are tracked. These collective initiatives have resulted in less access and transparency into government procurement activity and opportunities, and has increased requirement bundling, vendor consolidation, and market uncertainty. The unintended consequences of strategic sourcing and government-wide contracts impact the critical elements that sustain the industrial base: competition, innovation, and economic stimulus. Surviving in this marketplace is not easy for any vendor, but it is made especially difficult for small businesses who could prove real value to our country. The move to category management, further contract consolidation, shrinking contracting offices, bundling of requirements, and the strict focus on socioeconomic spending versus the quality of the small business requirements being competed has had a significant impact on small businesses. The U.S. economy is firmly dependent on a healthy market competition. Competition for federal contracts breeds innovative solutions and passes on cost savings to the taxpayer. To increase competition, there must be equal opportunity to contribute to each agency's unique missions. If the federal government wants small businesses to thrive, we need to rethink how new, innovative, and qualified players can enter the market while structuring vehicles that allow agencies to procure the right solutions that truly fit their mission needs. Without these considerations, small businesses may fall in the wake of large business conglomerates. On behalf of the Pulse, I thank you for your attention on this important issue and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Alba, now you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Velasquez and Ranking Member Luke DeMeyer. Members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Cy Alba, and I'm a partner of the law firm of Polaro Mazza with offices in Washington, D.C., Annapolis, and Boulder, Colorado. We serve clients that operate throughout the United States and around the world, spanning virtually all industries, but we have a historical focus on government contractors. That said, my testimony today represents my own views and not those of Polaro Mazza clients or the firm. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with the committee on changes that can better serve the small business community who make up the foundation of our economy. As the federal contracting landscape is difficult to traverse, companies of all sizes must invest a great deal of time and money to ensure compliance with applicable laws and regulations. For small businesses, this difficulty is only exacerbated by the mandated use of best-in-class contracts and large government-wide acquisition contracts. Many of our clients have seen work vital to their businesses swept up into these large vehicles outside of their reach. Their incumbent small business work being consolidated with other requirements, forcing them to team with companies or become subcontractors where their fate is dictated by a prime contractor with whom they've never worked and may not trust. That being said, it's important to note that GWACs and best-in-class contracts are not inherently problematic. Indeed, obtaining work on these contracts is a critical component of many small business growth strategies, as companies can continue to qualify for task order awards even after they've organically outgrown their size standards, instead of being unceremoniously thrown into the unrestricted space. These contracts can be used to help these companies survive long enough to learn the rigors of unrestricted procurements, which can include higher compliance challenges and lower profit margins. This struggle is very real, as even being 1 cent over your size standard means that your company must now compete with firms that may have revenues of 100 million, 100 billion, or more. There is no limit. Given this, we have to find a better way of using GWACs and best-in-class contracts to support small business growth and development. For instance, GWACs and best-in-class contracts should have more frequent on-ramps, perhaps even every year or two. This would allow small businesses to participate and not lose out on 5 or 10-year vehicles based merely upon their status or ability to compete as of the date of the initial solicitation. On-ramps would greatly reduce the stress on companies to secure a spot on these large contracts, thereby reducing the incredibly high stakes of these procurements, reducing bid costs for small businesses, and avoiding locking out firms who come into existence mid-contract outside of the on-ramp period. Additionally, prohibit removing requirements that have been previously set aside for small businesses onto these large vehicles without first performing some impact analysis of how the incumbent contractor and the small business community would be harmed by the move. I cannot count the number of times I've had small business owners beg for help when requirements their companies have performed for sometimes over 20 years are suddenly moved into IDIQ vehicles that they do not possess. Third, it should be made clear that the rule of two, which requires contracts to be set aside for small businesses when two or more such firms can perform the work, applies to task orders issued under IDIQ contracts pursuant to FAR Part 16, as well as GSA Schedule contract task orders under FAR 8.4. Otherwise, contracting officers will continue to exploit this loophole to strip small businesses of procurement opportunities while enriching the largest companies. In addition to the ability for small businesses to survive the struggles of graduating to a mid-sized company, the SBA's Mentor Protege program is also an extremely important tool for growing the industrial base. The SBA's Mentor Protege program allows mentor firms to help proteges grow and develop using small business set-aside contracts while allowing these teams protection from being affiliated and incentivizing larger businesses to truly mentor the small business participants. This program is not as without its faults, but with proper oversight by SBA, it can truly help build the next generation of our supply chain for the federal market. Many of these issues surrounding large contracts are due to short-sighted decisions by agencies to force category management upon the market without thinking about the negative consequences on small businesses. As a result, our entire industrial base is impacted and it becomes increasingly difficult for new companies to enter the federal market. Every small business federal contractor must be protected, and as a nation, we cannot afford to lose more of our critical industrial base, a very real risk noted by the Department of Defense this past February, as noted earlier today. I applaud the committee for holding this important hearing today to address these ongoing issues. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alba. And now we recognize Ms. Casey for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Lukemeyer, and the members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of small businesses about government-wide contractors and contracts. I'm the CEO and founder of Arcaspicio, a woman-owned small business. We do have government-wide vehicles, including the Human Capital and Training Solutions contract with GSA, and we made our way up to that by first subcontracting, then winning our initial contracts on multiple award schedules before being able to compete on a large GWAC. We are also a small business mentor to Protege Second Wave in the Mentor Protege program. And as a small business that helps other small businesses, we find it rewarding to help them grow as well. While category management broadly helps the federal government increase procurement efficiencies, our company has seen it reduce the number of small businesses and the type and number of opportunities that are available for small businesses, including us, to compete on. This reduces innovation that the small businesses can offer. Like other small businesses, we absolutely love to work for the government, and we simply want the opportunity to compete. Government-wide vehicles shift small business opportunities to very small pools of winning contractors, rather than fostering competition among diverse companies under the GSA mass schedules or other contracts. This reduces opportunities for newer small businesses who seek their first opportunities as a prime contractor. It also reduces opportunities for established small businesses who are high performers on incumbent contracts, essentially pushing these recompete opportunities to best-in-class vehicles and not allowing great small businesses to recompete for their current work. This actually places burden not only on the small business who can't recompete, it provides extreme additional administrative burden to the government, who has to transition and is forced to transition to new contractors, and this puts the mission at risk. Small businesses should be allowed to compete on their follow-on contracts, and the committee can explore innovative best practices such as permanent legislation rather than frequently changing policies at the agency level about these topics and mandates. This will spur competition, lower prices, and foster innovation. Another issue for the committee to consider is the incredible cost to pursue government-wide contracts. Arcaspicio estimates that it costs us somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000 for each proposal for a government-wide vehicle. In addition, we have to pay costs to get quality certifications such as the Capability Maturity Model and ISO 9000. And while these are great quality certifications, these certifications cost $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 and require annual audits. In addition, award timeframes and protests really delay any investment we make. We'd love the committee to consider the GSA multiple award schedules and expanding use of these, helping to companies to get their first opportunities at prime contracts. Based on our experience, and we have 18 years in the federal government, Arcus Bicio does not want to cede control of our work and enter into a joint venture prime contract with a large firm. We've built our experience and really want to win on our own. However, this puts us at a disadvantage when competing with other small businesses who are backed by and often controlled by large businesses of $100 billion or more. We want fair opportunities to compete against other non-joint venture small businesses. We look forward to the committee exploring incentives for more established small businesses to help other small businesses grow. This might take the form of grants or encouraging the use of additional evaluation credit on task order bids when a small mentors a protege and they bid together. In conclusion, I want to thank the committee and ask them to consider additional ideas to regrow the small business space and help them recover from the unintended consequences. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Ms. Askew, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chair Velasquez, Ranking Member Luke DeMeyer, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Rebecca Askew, and I am the owner and general counsel of Circuit Media based in Denver, Colorado. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Women's Procurement Council, which advocates for policies that strengthen women-owned companies that do business with the federal government. Women fought for 11 years to get the Women-Owned Small Business Federal Contracting Program in place and an additional 2 years to get sole source authority. Yet the federal government has only met its 5% goal for contracting to women twice since 1994. As a new participant in government-wide contracts, I hope to provide insight into the resources required to adequately respond to these opportunities. I started Circuit Media out of my basement with a focus on providing clear and concise communications to law and government. Circuit Media has since grown into a strong supplier of goods and services to local, state, and federal governments. With a diverse background in communications, creative services, and staffing, Circuit Media assists clients in creating cost-effective and compelling deliverables. Circuit Media had the opportunity to participate in SBA's 8A Small Development Program. This program allowed us to learn and develop expertise in the federal contracting arena. As we entered the transitional stage of the program, our plan for growth focused on differentiating our company through the continued use of set-asides and attempting to obtain slots on government-wide contracts. For a small business to respond to an IDIQ, it takes significant time, money, and human capital. The response consists of hundreds of pages over multiple volumes and dozens of pricing categories. At Circuit Media, we dedicate at least one proposal writer and one financial analyst to manage the bulk of the submission. This removes these individuals from their normal work responsibilities and requires others to double up work. There are always multiple amendments and changes to the original solicitation, which demands extraordinary attention to detail and record-keeping, as errors or omissions are deductions. Winning a slot also in no way guarantees a company will win work with a federal agency. It only allows you to compete for the opportunities released on the IDIQ. I like it to getting a fishing license. You can throw your line into the water, but no catch is assured. I would like to discuss our recent experience responding to GSA's staffing IDIQ, HCATs. As Circuit Media provides staffing services to the government, we felt it was necessary to respond. We spent weeks preparing our submission. Our final proposal was hundreds of pages and included 168 different pricing categories. It had to be physically mailed to New York City and was only accepted on DVD disc. We submitted our response on March 20, 2020, the day we closed our offices to the pandemic. After submission, our first communication with GSA occurred 9 months later. Because of the significant lapse in time, GSA changed components of the evaluation criteria, which they applied retroactively. This subjective post-submission change in evaluation resulted in our company missing the award cutoff by 100 out of 28,470 points. Agencies failed to realize that delays in contract award and changes in midstream can be seismic shifts for small business, making or breaking their ability to win work. My experience points to the need for simplification of the agency front. Congress can assist women in being more successful in securing government contracts by adopting the following actions proposed by the Women's Procurement Circle. Number 1, increase awards to women-owned business, including increasing ED WOSB goals and raising the WOSB goal to 10%. Maximize WOSB awards on government-wide contracts. Number 3, expand sole source contract opportunities for WOSBs. Number 4, eliminate ED WOSBs to have allow ED WOSBs to have access to business development tools to grow and thrive. Number 5, eliminate double counting for contract awards. And number 6, require agencies to fully utilize Made in America products. The federal government's acquisition practices are geared towards large companies competing on enormous government buying vehicles. Congress rightfully continues to require agencies to buy from small business. Over 90% of all women-owned businesses are small. Therefore, women are major stakeholders in these policy actions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Askew. And now I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Hart, so what you described in your opening statement, as well as the other witnesses, is consolidation at its best, at the expense of small businesses, at the expense of taxpayers, and innovation. So GSA tracks small business utilization through the category management dashboard. What does the dashboard show regarding small business utilization in more recent years?
Thank you for your question, Chair. So the GSA GWCM Small Business Utilization Dashboard, which is under the dashboard you just referenced, shows 30% utilization consistently from fiscal year 18 to today, which is about the only thing that is tracked. When compared to industry-wide, that's about consistent of about 29%. So it seems to be consistent with how industry is tracking, but there is very small, but you can see it decrease actually in that utilization that's beginning to track.
So if the small business base has decreased substantially, how could you explain the federal government still meeting the small business goals?
So the key statutory tracking for agencies is to actually focus on the small business dollars, which has increased. We're all aware of that. However, the number has to be carefully looked at because within each socioeconomic category, numbers can be counted double or triple depending on the socioeconomic category. So that's how they're able to keep the numbers in rising as well. So the business report can kind of exist for different vendors, transactions, and obligations can be counted triple times. An example of this metric could be the number of unique vendors receiving small business dollars is how that really could be fixed if we actually look at the number of vendors, unique vendors getting those dollar amounts.
Thank you. Mr. Alba, not only are requirements being consolidated into a few best-in-class contracts, but these contracts use a self-scoring evaluation process that it has its own set of unique challenges. What are some of the challenges the self-scoring evaluation process poses for some businesses?
Yeah, thank you. I think the main thing with the self-scoring is, like has been talked about, a lot of businesses are just looking to tick boxes because you have to. That's the way the system is set up, right? And so companies are looking for either the large business mentor or they're looking for 10 or 15 different companies to joint venture with, or if it's allowed by subcontractors, they do that. And they're forced to go after not the best companies to do the job, but the companies to maximize the point scores. One person with a $7 million contract, one likely big guy who has an approved purchasing system, one person who's got this skill, one person that's got that skill set. So you get this jack of all trades, potentially master of none scenario instead of, I think, the best procurement for the best companies.
Thank you. And Ms. Casey, so you are a company that has served as a mentor for another small contractor. Can you please talk to us about the benefits of small business being mentored by a larger small business?
Absolutely. We mentor a company called Second Wave. They're an 8A and service disabled veteran-owned company. Because we have recently been a smaller company, yet we have 18 years of experience, we understand the challenges of newer entrants and newer and smaller small businesses. Our executives have the time to take to actually spend time with our protege company. We've done offsites with them and helped them create strategies to pursue new business. We've pursued new business with them. We've helped build up their proposal process so they can actually compete, and they've since won more contracts. This idea of more established small businesses working with newer small businesses is a wonderful idea because we've recently lived through it. It's very rewarding for me as a CEO to work with another small business. And small businesses are great both advocates and resources for other smalls who are newer entrants to the market.
Thank you. And Ms. Askew, in 20 seconds, in your perspective, what are some of the areas that must be improved?
Thank you for the question. In my opinion, the areas that must be approved is clear and concise communications and standardization. If you are applying to one of the government-wide contracts, that you can actually understand what the rules that are and how they're being applied to you, as well as looking at opportunities for women-owned, other types of opportunities within those GWACs so that everyone can have a level playing field.
Thank you. And now I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Askew, it seems the goal of these government-wide contracts is to reach administrative efficiencies and cost savings through contract consolidation. This is something I agree with, but it seems to hinder small business growth. Do you think it's possible for the government to find both efficiencies and save taxpayer dollars while also building a robust and healthy small business base?
Thank you for the question. In my estimation, it's been difficult to be able to balance both of those. It's sort of you throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're trying to do consolidation, but that leaves small businesses in the lurch and unable to respond or even to be on the playing field. That example of us trying to respond to a government-wide contracting opportunity really displayed that capability. We put all of our resources towards that opportunity and still came up short. So I think that, when you're looking at the best way to manage, the balance between the two, I think it's best to realize that being a small business, you aren't going to have that equal playing field, and there needs to be some kind of measurement for that.
Thank you for that. Just a quick question with regards to the things that are going on in society today and how it's affecting your ability to bid on contracts here. With additional inflation and supply chain problems and reliability of supply chain, do you have something built into your contracts to be able to allow the bidder is there flexibility in there with regards to inflationary costs, inability to weather some of the supply chain disruptions? How do you manage that situation? That's the $24 million question, actually. It is, when you enter into a contract and when you
enter into a contract with the government, you are contracting at that moment in time, and there's not any kind of additional remedies that can occur. An example of that is Juneteenth. We moved from having that not be a holiday to that being a federal holiday, and all contracts, you needed to be flexible during that period of time. So,
Okay. The question, I guess, is there enough flexibility in the contracts to allow you to be able to adjust and be able to, if you're sitting there guessing at what inflation is going to be down the road, you don't have any firm commitments from people who are your suppliers, it's supply chain problems. Is there enough flexibility in the contracts to be able to allow you to, or do you have to bid up significantly higher in order to be able to be able to run the risk of not having enough built into there to be able to make some money on it?
That's a great question. Actually, with LPTA or some of the contracts where they look at lowest price or best value, your margins become pretty slim. They become pretty small because you want to be competitive with all the other businesses. And so, there isn't a ton of flexibility, to be honest.
One of the problems that would seem to me is the length of time some of these contracts take for you to be able to fulfill the contractual obligation. And so it may be weeks, months, years to be able to fulfill a contract. So how do you project out? I know I've got some constituents that are stuck in the situation here where they bid it, and now with this runaway inflation that we have, they're going to be, unless the government's willing to come back and help them arbitrarily, they're going to be in big trouble here because they're not going to have enough income or enough equity in that contract to be able to survive. They're actually going to wind up losing money out of the deal. So I would think there needs to be some sort of clause or flexibility in there to allow the small businesses who are probably not flush with tons and tons of cash, otherwise they'd be bigger businesses, to be able to survive.
I think that's very astute. And I would say that it is a difficult problem, and I'm not sure I have the solution. I would say that there are brief increases that occur every year with the contract, but you have to measure that increase with the ability or the need to win one of those contracts to continue to compete.
Ms. Hart, you heard my question? You want to? That's part of what you do is this consulting on these contracts. So would you have a comment on that?
Absolutely. So I believe there was a recent EO on inflation from the administration allowing flexibility for at least defense contractors to take that into consideration. And then there are some IDIQ vehicles and GWACs that are now allowing you to compete at the task order level on pricing, which means you don't submit pricing at the umbrella level, if you will, and leave it to compete.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm out of time here. So just a clarification here. So the executive order allows enough discretion by the agency to be able to work out a deal with the contractor then to make sure they don't go under. And then if they go under, they may not be able to actually provide the service or product, although they probably have a bond to make sure that works. But we don't want to lose people in this process.
It's not my area of expertise, but from what I understand, it does allow some flexibility for contractors to bring in inflation.
All right, thank you very much. I yield.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've got a general question that any of you would like to address. We know that during COVID, there was an extension for individuals that were 8A contractors to theoretically make up the loss of opportunity because the world shut down. That year, that was an extension, actually turned to be less than a year. What value, if any, do you believe that extension gave, and how could we do better? Perhaps grant even an additional time for people that may have been on the timeout, running out of time with the certification, didn't fully get the prescribed time. Can someone share with me their views on how we can do better, how that worked, and your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that. I'm a member of the board of the Bowie Business Innovation Center, which has an 8A accelerator program in a historically black college or university, only in the country. And so I deal with these issues often. And this is one of those things that I've heard repeatedly, where the companies have sort of begged to get an additional year, given the way that COVID has extended itself out. They haven't been able to meet with contracting officers as often. The events are only just starting to happen, conferences and whatnot. And so it's been difficult to interface with individuals and market. And that has been, I think, a major factor in a lot of the 8As that I've been talking to and who we work with in our program in getting new contracts and growing, especially those who are towards the end and are looking to maybe get on some new contracts to weather this next challenging storm.
Ms. Casey?
I would say as a mentor to an 8A company, they would, since things are really only starting back, they would love an additional year to be able to build up their business. COVID has really hurt the opportunity to sell to the government.
So I think more than them just loving to have an additional year, I think there's a case to be made that they did not get the full complement of what the program is designed to do, because even though it was an extension, the extension wasn't, in fact, a full year, but the effects of COVID and the supply chain crises is very much still in effect. So people are still suffering. So just wanted to get your observations and your thoughts on that. I'm happy to hear that it's consistent with what I hear from my constituents. And Madam Chair and Ranking Member, I'd like to ask that we include this in our further due diligence as we move forward on how we can really make these individuals whole who have suffered greatly at the hands of something that's beyond all of our control, COVID and supply chain. Quickly pivoting from that, I'd like to ask a question about the mentor protege programs. What obstacles, if any, have you had in really getting to businesses that are out there that might benefit, but aren't aware of the various resources?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that too. So, dealing with small businesses all over the country and things, I think there's a disparity in information, I think, depending on where you are. So some places in the country, like around here, around the Beltway, there's a lot more knowledge of these programs. Whereas when you go in other places, and I have a number of clients in the Huntsville area and things of that nature, they have fewer and fewer resources available to them. And there isn't as much, I think, outreach. Potentially SBA could have more sessions in some of these areas and explain the benefits of the program with potentially all these great small business mentors like we heard about earlier who are willing and offering this type of help to these.
Let me ask you real quickly before my time runs out. So this is something that I hear from my constituents quite often, is some of the mentorship protege programs, while they work financially, they don't always work in the vein of giving that protege a true opportunity to learn the business and really perform. How do we overcome the relationship that becomes one more of a financial partnership and less a partnership for that protege to actually learn the business to become a mentor to someone else?
So I would say there are already a number of rules in place that we could just do a better job of enforcing. So at SBA looks at reports that proteges give every year as to how the mentor-protege relationship is going. But I haven't personally seen them do much with it. So potentially the SBA could take a closer look at these issues, go through the mentor-protege agreement, make sure the promises that are in that agreement are being met specifically, not just joint venturing, not just contracting. SBA says all the time that it's to develop your business. It's not a business development program. And to take that to heart and move that forward, I think was what we...
Gentleman's time has expired. And now we recognize...
Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, Vice Ranking Member of the Committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Ranking Member Lukemeyer, and witnesses for being here today.
Envoy General Lyons was just appointed a couple of weeks ago.
I'm back.
He works closely with the FRA to address any challenges that we see on the supply
Can
chain.
you please, the members that are hybrid, mute yourself? Thank you. Mr. Williams, yes, I will give you more time.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is why we need everybody here and quit this nonsense we got going. Thank you all for being here today. And before I address small businesses' role in government's contracting, I'd like to take a minute to address the current state of our economy. I'm probably one of the few, maybe Ranking Member Lukemeyer, that was a small business owner in the 1980s. I'm still owning the same business I had in the 80s, in 81 and 82, where we saw so many of the same issues we're facing today. And if we keep going the way we're going, there's not going to be any mentor programs. I'm just telling you. Let's go back to 1981. In 1981, we had inflation out of control. We had leadership that had no idea what to do about it except condemn our country. So we had inflation out of control. The Federal Reserve was raising interest rates. We had 20% interest. 20% interest. So if you were a small business owner, you went to the bank and you borrowed at 19%. 19% interest. And if you had any money, you had a CD, Ranking Member Lukemeyer's banks were paying 19% on 2-year CDs, if you can imagine that. So interest rates were out of control, and principal balances were so much different. Today, everybody's concerned about 6%, which we should be. We're paying 6% interest on, I'm in the automobile business, and in 1981, I sold you could buy a car for me for $3,000 and finance it at 20%. But that same car now is $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. You can finance it at 6%, and the principal balances are so much higher. It's just creating one heck of a problem for us. And homes, we see what's happening. Home you could buy for $40,000, now you buy for $400,000. Chain disruptions. We didn't have that in 1980. The one thing we had in 1980 was product. We could sell our way out of it. We could claw our way out of this problem. But now there's no product. I don't have any cars to sell. There's no nuts and bolts in hardware stores. It's a mess. We have chain disruptions like we've never seen before. So at least we had debt. So 20% interest compared to 6% interest, that's a real problem. I have a concern for our economy. Our economy is in a serious, serious issue. And you all talk about growth and getting the government out of small business and talking about competition. That's what it's all about, but we don't have that now. You see, we need to get out of this by quit spending money we're printing that's worthless, and we need to let Main Street compete and be able to help get ourselves out of this mess. But we all need to have our eyes open of the situation we're in right now. We got the best workers in the world, and we're paying them to sit on the sidelines. So we need to make it easier on Main Street. We need to cut taxes. We need to reduce regulations, and we need to let the private sector and small business get us out of this mess. I'm for that. I think all of you are too, from what I hear with your testimony. So with that, before I move into my other question, Ms. Askew, what is your general take on the economy, and how is it impacting your small business and the businesses you represent?
Thank you for the question. At the end of the day, revenue is the driver that makes any small business successful. And, you know, obviously, no one wants higher taxes or inflation.
Thank you for saying that.
That is, I think we would all agree to that. And so trying to figure out
Not everybody.
Well, trying to figure out a way in which you can manage that and still grow your business is really a challenge.
Well, it is. And all American small businesses deserve an opportunity to compete, as we talk about, for government contracts against the larger counterparts. However, the current bidding process, we hear, is extremely resource intensive and prevents small businesses from even attempting to break into this potential revenue stream. Businesses are having to make the decisions to commit significant resources to secure a spot for these federal contracts or take one more additional growth opportunity, like hiring that additional employee or investing in new equipment. These are two options, should not be an either or a scenario. So every qualified small business should be able to have their opportunity to secure a contract without being prohibitively expensive. So again, Ms. Askew, you've experienced the same frustrations firsthand. Can you elaborate on the decisions your business had to make to decide to break into the contracting world, and what recommendations do you have that would allow smaller businesses with less resources the opportunity to compete?
Thank you for the question. It's a day-by-day decision-making process that we go into at Circuit Media, trying to decide, there is this opportunity, how is that going to impact us? Who do we have to pull off of the opportunity to respond, just, to respond, to get that opportunity to perhaps win, and how are we going to manage that with our current workload? And so it's a day-by-day decision-making process that my team and I go through to try to figure out, it's do we rob Peter to pay Paul? How do we manage that?
Trying to figure out how to beat the government stuff. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Ms. Casey, to what extent has engaging in joint ventures become necessary for small businesses to successfully navigate the federal government, the federal procurement space, and why?
Well, we're an established small business, and we decided to enter into being a mentor to a smaller small business to be able to help them compete on additional contracts. Certainly, we do get a benefit if we win any of those contracts, but that's really helping grow a small business. On the other hand, though, we have decided not to enter into a mentor-protege program with a large business. Arcus Piscio really likes to control our own destiny, manage contracts, deliver on our contracts. And we have the experience to do that with the federal government and have worked on more than 150 projects. The current business environment, though, is pushing us to almost be forced into a joint venture with a large business in order to continue to be able to compete on contracts. And that is a big challenge for us, because we would like to not have to compete with joint ventures that are backed by $100 million companies, because we can perform the work on our own.
Given the shift towards government-wide contracts and best-in-class vehicles, what would be your number one recommendation for new businesses interested in becoming federal contractors?
That's a great question. What helped us when we started out was the support of other small businesses. I think networking among small businesses will really help newer entrants navigate the complexities of today's business environment and the challenges of government-wide contracts. Networking to gain experience and knowledge of how to write proposals, how to get subcontract opportunities that lead to prime contract opportunities on things like GSA schedules, so that when the time comes, you're ready to bid on a government-wide contract. But it's a journey, and you can't just jump to a government-wide contract. And I think smaller businesses can help other new entrants navigate that complex environment and build a business strategy that's lasting and can help these new entrants succeed.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. I yield back, Madam Chairperson, balance my time.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muser, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I thank the ranking member, and I certainly thank the witnesses for being here on a not necessarily complicated, but interesting set of circumstances where you can see the benefits for these government contracts on the side of the purchaser, the government agencies, and you can certainly understand your point, because these being on such government contracts is referred to as winning a golden ticket. That's not good. So, the government-wide contracts, the benefits, less contracts. I mean, I was in state government, that not only makes life easier, but allows you to analyze things and more so perhaps less work, less contracting overall. The idea of consolidating purchasing, you got to appreciate that. That could create a lower prices overall. The double counting issue was misguided. I have a bill, actually, if you take a look at it, 7685, which would bring Truth in Small Business Contracting Credit Act. So take a look at that. Maybe you can weigh in on the committee, Republicans and both sides, and see if that's something you think that we should get behind and endorse. But in the meantime, solutions, the joint venture, okay, latch on to someone who's already on a GWAC, and then just reapplying. Now, Mr. Alba, you mentioned the challenges in reapplying, but let me just start with Ms. Askew. So if you're not on these GWACs and you do fit well, but you're on one particular agency and you're active, to gain additional business, additional contracts, is that a virtual impossibility because the GWAC is already confined for a 5-year period?
Thank you for the question. It is difficult. It is definitely difficult as a small business when we are working within an agency, trying to increase our exposure or our opportunities within that agency. I think one of my other witnesses mentioned the fact that there's no way to communicate or market to those agencies really now going forward because of the fact that everything's virtual and no one, you aren't having an opportunity to really meet with anyone that could assist you. In my experience, trying to be, increase our exposure or opportunities within a contracting vehicle or on a GWAC is difficult because you're out in the void. You're trying to respond to opportunities that you aren't aware that they're even coming.
Yeah, and I was on the private sector side as well, trying to get contracts for a number of years, and there's no question, even though you work hard towards it and you have the right price point and right product, you feel almost lucky to get it in the end. It's like you're happy that you felt so fortunate that you spoke to the right person and they reviewed things right. So being that is still the case, or maybe even worse, because I'm going back a good 10 years, what could each of you tell me, maybe the one thing or two things, if you like, that we really need to zero in on here? Because the goal is small businesses, women-owned businesses, diversity but at the same time, the highest quality and best price. So maybe, I don't know, Ms. Hart, if you want to start.
Sure, I can start. I can give 2 recommendations. I think we need to formally and legally define best-in-class contracts. Currently, it's a very objective 5-point standard that is not really followed, and it's not in the FAR, and so it's very hard for small businesses to understand and comply. My second recommendation would be creating government-wide IDIQs with explicit technical focus. As I mentioned, GSA Polaris has construction on there as a requirement, and that's not atypical. That's a very typical thing that you see now.
And Mr. Alba, to you. And then is there a particular agency that is the most difficult, that needs to really pick up their game?
I mean, the CIOS before was somewhat of a mess. I think I've written a lot about that. So that would be one, the NITEC folks. But I think just generally, if you could have these GWACs and instead of this jack of all trades idea, to narrow it down and maybe allow you to bid on different pools, each like contract line item number or section of the contract, to get the best people for that section, as opposed to having to award someone who can do everything. Because I don't think you get the best product that way.
Thanks. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Golden, Chairman, Subcommittee on Underserved Agricultural and Rural Business Development.
Thank you. Ms. Hart, under the mentor-protege joint venture, as you know, a small business has to perform at least 40% of the work. Is that the appropriate share of the workload in your opinion? And if so, why? If not, why not? And if you think there should be changes, so if these joint ventures should be modified so that small businesses take home more of the work, what's the right mark? And what might be the pros and cons of increasing that?
That's a great question. So in order to perform under these IDIQs or even task orders, the prime has to perform 51% of the work. So I do believe that increasing it from 40% to a little bit higher makes a lot of sense. I do understand that that puts some burden on small businesses, but I think you do get a better product and a better vendor out of that that's a little bit more qualified, and maybe one that's a little bit more established to take advantage, as my witnesses have also said, of the large business offering those support services. So I would definitely take a look at increasing that. I think that that could definitely help. As the mentor protege program has kind of been taken advantage of over the past few years with these government-wide contracts, people are just kind of forming them in order to compete. So I think to bring it back to an actual technical focus would be a good idea.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Let's ask you, in your testimony, one of the things that really got my attention the most was when you said that you had to send in your application by mail, and then of course you had to wait 9 months. You said to get any kind of contact even from the entity that you were submitting your application to. So it seems like in general through the Q&A here that what you've highlighted, one is that even for your business, even choosing whether or not to compete, there's a lot of staff hours that are going to go into even figuring out if it's the right move for your company. A lot of staff hours, obviously, into what is often, pretty burdensome application process, and then probably some significant challenges just knowing that it could take a very long time before you even know if you're going to get the award and move forward. So with that in mind, just knowing that you're here in front of the committee and small businesses will be watching this, if you were in a situation where you were meeting with another business who was thinking about getting involved in best in contract type work for the first time, what would your advice be to them on how to best prepare for that and what the challenges would be that they need to consider?
Thank you so much. I think we've highlighted most of the significant challenges: the money, the time, and the resources. And when you are repurposing your resources, you're not doing the other work that you need to do in order to continue to have your business thrive. My advice to a organization, a company that might be interested in going after these larger vehicles is, our position is at Circuit Media is that that's where the opportunities are, and I would not be telling the truth if I told someone don't go after it because it's too much work or it's too hard. It's where the opportunity is, and I would be remiss to tell someone not to do that.
That's helpful. Do either of you two have any follow-up to that?
I'll say this might be a sad comment, but I would tell people to read the solicitation very carefully and just tick the boxes. And I think that's the biggest problem of all of this, but that's all you need to do. Read it very carefully and find someone to tick every single box you can.
I would chime in on that as a saying that we have is compliance is king, and if you're not compliant, it doesn't matter if you're compelling in order to compete.
In general, where do you see small businesses try and fail?
Failing. I'd say when it comes to unclear language, I think a lot of companies are afraid to ask questions because they want to try to take advantage of any ambiguity, not really understanding it through the protest process and the laws that currently exist. If you don't get your questions answered, you lose the opportunity to challenge those things or deal with it.
The gentleman yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm over here, you guys, over in the corner. Ms. Askew, can you go back to, there was kind of a general discussion about the costs associated with just making the application. And this is not the first time we've kind of skirted around the discussion about is there the wherewithal, first of all, for a small business to kind of just come up with not only the resources available through their own labor force, but being able to pull this stuff together. And I think you said there was like a $20,000 figure just imposed during the IDIQ can you talk about the costs associated with that?
Yes, thank you. Our costs, every time you decide to go after one of these contracts, you have to make a decision. Am I going to hire out or have a consultant assist me so that I know which boxes to tick? I think Mr. Alba had an interesting comment that, yes, in fact, it is really hard as a small business to try to figure out which boxes do you try to check off. And so whether you're using a third-party vendor that can come in and say to you, here are the 18 boxes, or in our situation, hundreds of boxes that you need to check, that really becomes a financial decision. Am I going to utilize my in-house staff, and we might not be as well-versed or as capable as a vendor might be able to help us, and that's where the money really comes in, whether you're choosing to hire someone to help you or whether you're doing it internally.
The other thing that, and any one of the panelists can talk about this, I guess, is can you elaborate on the contracting officer subjectivity and just how that plays into whether or not you get the contract as well? Go ahead, Ms. Askew.
Sure, I can provide an example on our HCATS opportunity. From the period of time that we submitted our application to after that period of time that we got our first response, they changed the evaluation criteria. And in my situation, we had one of the things they evaluated were your reviews, your company reviews. They're called CPARs. And in my situation, the CPARs, we had a change in contracting officer who made a decision that they would not give exceptional CPARs. They would only give very goods. It had nothing to do with the quality of our work. It was just a subjective decision by the contracting officer. And so in that situation, our points actually dropped because we were, although same work, same company, we were evaluated differently during that period of time.
And again, any one of you can jump in on this, because I know that at some level in the higher DoD contracting, you almost have this situation where sometimes those in charge on the technical level will become somewhat embedded with the corporation. So there's a back and forth that exchange can develop into something that happens on a regular basis. How much contact was there with those that were overseeing kind of the process? Was there any exchange on a regular basis?
I could respond to that. We had no exchange.
Okay.
The first contact we had was at 9 months where they said, we're changing the criteria and can you respond based on this new criteria?
Yeah, so maybe a suggestion for you, Madam Chair, it would be interesting to see like at what level some of those, exchanges start to happen, because obviously at some point there's many different resources being poured in by the government to develop these strategies, especially when they have to determine what kind of inclination or escalation, I guess, a better word, in labor force you would need to meet the needs of the contract. So I think it would be something great for the committee to dig into and see if we can't get some better answers on that. But thank you very much for being here. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Now we recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Tenney, for 5 minutes.
Hi, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I greatly appreciate it. It's a very interesting hearing, and thank you to the witnesses, because I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand, how complicated government contracting is and the amount of money that we spend of taxpayer dollars, and how important it is to make sure that money is distributed in a way or awarded in a way for contracts with reliable vendors and reliable people that are going to live up to the standards that we set by this code. But it's really interesting to show how, just listening to you all, it's very interesting just to hear an awful lot of alphabet soup of terms that I think a lot of people don't understand. And I wanted to just go to Ms. Askew first, if I could, and just elaborate on what Representative Fitzgerald was getting into. And you're talking about the $20,000 that you needed for an IDIQ. And I'm just going to say this is an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity type of contract, which may make somebody in business like me go, how do you have a contract that isn't clearly defined? And I just wondered if you could talk about that 20,000 being a barrier to entry and getting new businesses like your business and smaller ones involved in the process, and why that's sort of an undefined concept.
Yes, thank you. In our situation, being able to respond, and you might say in the large scheme of things that $20,000 might not be a lot of money, but that only allows you to get on if you win and if you are successful, it only allows you to get onto the vehicle. You then have to respond to every one of the subsequent opportunities. It's not, you don't win anything, you just win, as I was saying, a license.
But you just get to be in the bidding. That's it.
correct.
Are there additional fees that you have to pay after that initial 20,000? Because this looks, I'm interpreting this wrong. This looks like sort of an open-ended contract situation, because you're not reacting to a defined bid. It's just, you're in a situation where bids will emerge, and then you'll eventually, you're in the system. And then if it's undefined, there could be more coming up that would be available.
Right. You do have that opportunity to respond. I just approximated $20,000 because that's how much it costs for us to use a third-party assistance so that we perhaps could win. When we've done it ourselves, it's internal time, which probably actually equals more than $20,000. But for us, once again, when we're looking at those opportunities out there, these best-in-class vehicles are where everything's going. And so you have to, if I'm going to continue to be a viable business, that is a decision we have to make.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just, I think, for anyone watching this that's not a government contractor, just the idea that it's so complicated makes it look like there's room for subjectivity, and therefore the best contract is maybe not getting awarded. It's a contract being awarded based on maybe somebody with an inside relationship, which would be developed, obviously, if a contractor works with someone, they're going to end up getting good relationship. But I wanted to ask, Ms. Hart, you mentioned something about defining best in class, and I just wondered if you could elaborate a little more. I didn't quite catch what you were saying about that. When you say best in class, what do you mean, and how could we legislatively make that easier so that contracts are more available to small businesses and they could break through some of the barriers that we're seeing with them getting into this?
So that's a great question. In my written testimony, I do expand upon this on how GSA and OMB currently, they define best-in-class contracts. But the question you just asked, what does this mean, is actually what industry is currently asking all the time of what best-in-class contracts are. It is very subjective, and it's very open-ended, and there's no legal definition in the FAR or anywhere that says this is what a best-in-class contract is. So GSA very much gets to kind of make their own decisions on what that constitutes and what those definitions mean, and then apply that to industry, and we have to adjust and pivot and basically be at that whim in order to respond. So in summary, there is no definition of that currently.
Right. So what would we, if we're legislators, we're supposed to be making laws, what would you say, how should we define best in class in legislation if we're to propose it?
Well, that's a really large question. I would have to probably think on that and get back to you. But the way that I would look at that is having a one-size-fits-all approach to procurement is not sustainable for the federal government or to meet their mission needs. And a one-size approach, even for defense versus civilian, is not a right way to approach this. I mentioned looking at creating government-wide IDIQs with explicit technical focuses, or looking at standalone contracts that have more of an incentive in order to use that. I think that might be a better approach in looking at that, rather than trying to define what a best-in-class contract is, because I do think that could easily be taken advantage of, and we might find ourselves sitting here again with the exact same problem in a few years.
Yeah, thank you. No, I can add the frustration with I know people in government contracting from the DoD side and a number of other areas where it's just a very frustrating process. And taxpayers don't really understand him as well. It's so confusing, and they're worried that, you know, everything's an inside deal. And I'd just like to see it be more objective so that we can get good small businesses in that can provide excellent services at a lower cost and better quality to our government. And obviously, that's the mission of our inquiry today. But thank you again to the witnesses, to the chairwoman and the ranking member. I appreciate the time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Kim, ranking member on the Subcommittee on Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, our Velasquez and Member Meyer, for holding this important hearing to discuss many different ways to have contracting opportunities for small businesses. And I want to thank Mrs. for joining us today. Ms. Casey, let me start with you with my first question. I'm concerned that the rising use of joint ventures through today's mentor-protege program, creating a dependency among businesses on them to be competitive. So what is your assessment of the mentor-protege program and the formation of joint ventures and their impact on small businesses?
So I think that the Small Business Mentor Protege program is at its heart has the spirit of intending to grow small businesses and help small businesses get their feet on the ground and get a good start. I think there are a lot of unintended consequences that have not yet been assessed or studied. And I think there's a great opportunity to provide additional help and oversight to the Small Business Administration so that they actually collect more data and understand the implications. How much of the revenue that is going to these joint ventures is really ending up in small business? Mm-hmm. And how successful are these small businesses beyond the joint venture in winning contracts and building up their corporate capabilities to be a great prime contractor on their own? And so I think this is a great opportunity to collect data, to understand these unintended consequences so that you can seek to identify additional legislation that may actually take a program that has a spirit of helping small businesses and make that much more successful.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Let me ask to all witnesses, there is currently no process in place allowing the government to gather data on the federal contracts that went to small businesses versus large mentors. So would you be in favor of having a process that could allow us to tap into that data? And if so, how do you think having that data could improve federal contracting for small businesses? Any one of you can go first.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, there are laws and regulations that dictate the performance of work and what's allowed as a maximum. But yeah, you're absolutely right that there is no way of tracking internally what is happening in joint ventures. Some of these IDIQs, though, or other contracts do make you report back data on whether you're meeting the performance of work requirements and perhaps expanding that and making sure that it's done correctly. But I would say not just the dollars, but also making sure you report who's doing what so that you can show that the small business is actually learning from this experience, actually managing, actually doing the work, as opposed to just hitting some arbitrary number.
Unless another witness would like to respond to that, I have another question. So let me throw it out there in the short period of time I have. It seems like there are many government-wide contracts that offer very limited spots, although there are many qualified contractors out there. So do you have any thoughts on whether the government should open that pool to many more contractors and push competition down to the ordering level? Maybe Ms. Askew, you can answer this one.
Thank you. I would say that opening up to more spots could be an answer. The issue still becomes, how do you get on, you know, what resources and requirements do you need to be able to actually get onto that opportunity, no matter how many spots there are open? And so I think that's really where the difficulty lies.
Well, I'd like to hear more about the agency delays and amendments impacting small businesses' chance of success at getting on an award. So what is the typical timeline in which an award is made, and what potential factors delay these awards? And is there anything that can be done to mitigate the negative impact felt by small businesses?
I can cover that. In my experience with some of the government-wide contracts, it takes between 1 and 3 years to get to an award. Delays come in multiple forms. One, it takes a very long time for the government to evaluate the proposals. Secondly, there is an increase in the number of protests because maybe the requirements weren't as clear as they could have been. And then those protests create delays, as is seen in the examples of CIO SP4 and recently in Polaris. So the time between making the investment and the time you actually get the award, if you're lucky enough to get one of these coveted spots, could be 3 years. And you could have spent, in our case, between $60,000 and $100,000 on a single IDIQ bid. So making sure that the government provides a near final draft prior to releasing the solicitation, that would really allow businesses to know exactly what they're going to be bidding on, create a strategy, and reduce costs and time. So that could help quite a bit.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. I really look forward to working with my colleagues to improve the federal contracting process for small businesses. Thank you so much for letting me go over time, and I yield back my time.
The gentle lady yields back. And now we recognize the gentle lady from Texas, Ms. Van Dyne, Ranking Member, Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Regulation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair Velasquez and Ranking Member Lukemeyer for holding this hearing today. While large corporations might provide the manufacturing and scale to power our economy forward, our small business industrial base provides the agility and innovation necessary to keep us leading the world. Our ability to protect the supply of entrepreneurs from government overregulation and being crowded out by larger companies who have a greater ability to tip the regulatory scales will be crucial to the United States' ability to compete in the world stage in every industry. In the fiscal year 2020, the SBA announced that the federal government exceeded its small business contracting goals with $145.7 billion in federal contract dollars, up $13 billion from the previous year. And while that number may sound good, it hides the fact that the number of small businesses contracting with the federal government is actually rapidly shrinking. One reason for this almost 40% decline in the government's small business vendors is increased regulation and consolidation of contracts. Last year, Chairman Dean Phillips of the Oversight Committee and I held a hearing over the DoD's new cybersecurity assessment framework. It was the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And while the intent behind the framework was good, it left many small business contractors scrambling trying to navigate massive compliance manuals, while large contractors could simply rely on their large legal teams to meet the new requirements. And if you want to talk about how important it is to have people come up here and actually testify, this guy held up a 3-inch binder that was multiple inches thick. And he says, for me to be able to implement this, I'm going to have to hire a team of people. It's going to cost me about $100,000, and I, as a small business owner, do not have those margins. Think about what you're doing when you pass these. For large corporations, no big deal. But for the small businesses, this is something that we cannot do. So I guess my first question is going to be to Ms. Askew. Could, in your view, when competing for contracts with the federal government, is the scale tilted too far toward companies with greater compliance resources instead of businesses with the best product?
Thank you for that question. We are actually engaging right now in deciding how we're going to manage the maturity model that we're required to comply with in order to continue to win contracts. And so for circuit media, we've really had to, you're making a day-to-day decision about, am I going to do this or that? And, and the 3-inch binder is no joke. And so our position has been, how can we continue to compete, but still be able to pay our bills? And that has really been something that you think about on a daily basis.
Does anybody else on the panel want to weigh in on that question?
I'll say a couple things dealing with the regulations. Some of them are written so broadly and so vaguely, and it's really unfair. I mean, I deal with False Claim Act defense work as well, and I have situations right now where someone has a firm fixed price contract. The contract is not clear what that firm fixed price is for, and they bill the government on a firm fixed price basis. And the Department of Justice is now coming after them because they said, well, certain work wasn't done. It was firm fixed price. And so how is someone supposed to figure out what firm fixed price means if it doesn't mean firm fixed price? It's things like that that are causing needless problems for our small businesses.
Ms. Hart?
From a proposal standpoint, so I've been working on federal proposals for over a decade now, and I have never seen a request for proposal that was actually straightforward, that didn't involve a very large conversation on what does this mean several times. There are amendments that are put out that are ambiguous, that don't answer questions, that just say when you ask a 3-part question, their answer to that 3-part question is yes, and it's yes to what? And that is a common occurrence that happens all the time. So I would say absolutely, as someone that does support vendors in this, it absolutely, there's a lot of time and money spent on us just figuring out what is being asked.
And I don't know if we've got another witness up there. She wants to.
Yeah, I would echo what Ms. Hart and Ms. Askew have said. The number of regulations when you're bidding on one of these proposals, it's extremely complex. Newer small businesses don't understand what some of these compliance requirements really mean. And you have to go through so much compliance to just put in the proposal. And then you have to make sure you comply during delivery. So I would say that the proposals could be significantly simplified and less complex. We've seen attempts to do that through sam.gov. And so but I would say you get one thing that gets better and 3 things that get harder in terms of compliance and proposals.
Thank you, and I appreciate your input. We had actually introduced a bill that would look at SBA, and any regulation that you add, it would have to be budget negative or budget neutral. I hope we can move forward with that bill, but thank all the witnesses for your testimony today, and I yield.
Gentlelady yields back, and now we recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stover, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Luetkemeyer. I just want to follow up on my colleagues' questions. Under this administration, there's been an additional $201 billion of additional regulations on small businesses. The 4 of you said exactly what we've been talking about. You cannot continue to punish the small businesses across this country. As a former small business owner, that was one of the most devastating things that happens to small businesses. We always talk about the engine of our economy is our small businesses. Anywhere Main Street USA, our small businesses employ our friends and neighbors and make our economies grow. And this administration added an additional $201 billion to that. Mr. Alba, can you comment on those regulations? You just talked about some of them. How destructive are they and how cumbersome?
So I think it probably depends on which regulations, some are there to protect the government or protect others, but there are certainly a lot of issues that are very ambiguous. And the ambiguities, I think, are really what creates most of the additional cost, because they have to ask people like me what the heck something means. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. Like, what is the totality of the circumstances? How am I supposed to determine what I'm supposed to do if an agency bases what I'm doing is whether illegal or illegal on a totality of the circumstances?
Right. No, Ms. Askew, would you like to comment on these additional $201 billion of regulations that are stifling and destructive to small businesses? What's your comment?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Alba about the ambiguity. I think that anytime you can provide clear and concise information so that you can actually respond and respond accurately, because every time you don't respond accurately, it's counted against you. And so being able to, I think, really look at the ambiguity and try to look at, the language of what they're asking you to do would be very valuable.
Ambiguity, bureaucracy, same thing here. So recently, the House passed my bill, the Strengthening Subcontracting for Small Businesses Act. This bill will help incentivize prime contractors to comply with small business subcontracting goals. To our witnesses, as we continue to study and examine federal contracting and subcontracting issues, where should we focus our attention? Ms. Hart, go ahead.
So from my perspective, it would actually be providing more transparent data behind that. That information is currently not accessible and not reviewable for accuracy. So I think focusing on that, because there is a lot of reporting structured around that, but no one really knows what's being collected and how it's being collected and if it's being reported accurately by prime contractors. So I think talking to maybe subcontractors about that and making sure that they're being represented correctly and that maybe the prime's not overinflating how much support they're giving would be a great place to start.
Ms. Askew?
I think being clear about the work performed often on these small business plans, what ends up happening is that you might be part of that team, but you never see the work. And so I think to that point of having clarity and accountability and transparency, that would be really valuable because you aren't sure, although you might list a small business, you aren't sure that they're actually getting to be able to perform the work.
Right. And it's well known that there are high administrative costs associated with competing for and winning a large contract. Can you speak to your experience with this? And do you believe that the federal government acknowledges the unintended consequences these contracts have on small businesses? And Ms. Askew, I'll ask you first again.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if they acknowledge the amount of work that's required. I can certainly talk about the impact that it has on a small business.
Please go ahead.
Being able to, go back to your day-to-day operations and you're trying to, manage a team and move your company forward and be successful, being able to adequately respond and to be involved in a contracting environment with the federal government really does take, wherewithal and tenacity and all of the things that we do as small businesses. But being able to manage that and manage all the other things is really a difficult feat.
Thank you. My time's out. And to the witnesses, thanks for your comments, and we appreciate that. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and to the ranking member for holding this hearing today. Actually, I wanted to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Stauber. He just asked a question about, do you believe the federal government acknowledges the unintended consequences, the administrative costs associated with competing for and winning these large contracts have an effect on a small business? You answered that question. But I want to let the other witnesses, Ms. Hart, you talked about the administrative costs in your testimony, as well as some of the other witnesses. So I want to open that up to Ms. Hart first, and maybe the other two witnesses to talk about that.
So like a lot of this, I think the answer is it depends. Every contracting officer that puts out these requests for proposal, I think, has a different understanding of the practices of a government contractor. We most certainly communicate with a lot of them back and forth or have kind of, off the record conversations. And it ranges anywhere from they absolutely recognize the commercial practices and the cost of this to Ones very much believe that we already have something put together and we're able just to slap it into a template and submit it. I think that's shown when requests for proposals are released on Fridays before holidays, on Christmas, on New Year's and things like that, as well as the administrative cost for, 25 amendments and what that means. So I think the answer is it depends, since this is such a human-to-human type of selling process.
I appreciate the answer. Ms. Casey?
I think that some in government understand the unintended consequences and others don't. I think, though, senior government officials are really measured by their compliance to category management, and say we are meeting our category management goals, we are meeting our small business dollars, so we're doing great, we're meeting our small business dollars, but they're not measured on how large the small business base is and whether it's shrinking or it's growing. So I think figuring out how to measure based on the size of the small business base and its growth is also another metric that is critical for these agencies that are involved in major procurements.
I appreciate that. Sounds like they're just checking a box if the money's getting out the door, and then it might not actually be doing all it's supposed to be doing. Mr. Alba, did you have anything to add?
I think I'm not sure if the consequences are actually unintended. I think some of it is in order to reduce competition and reduce the number of proposals and things that have to be reviewed. The entire category management system is structured, I think, to focusing primarily on reducing administrative burden as opposed to actually getting the best products. And I think that's part of the issue.
I appreciate all those answers, and it definitely paints a picture from what I've been hearing from some of my small businesses. Ms. Hart, I wanted to follow up with something that also I got to tell you, your testimony that you submitted was very detailed. I appreciate it, and you detailed in it numerous government-wide acquisition activities, and you also outlined the number of protests associated with each. Why do you believe you're seeing these levels of protests?
So that might be a better question for witness Alba, but what I do believe and what I see is because the business life depends on it. You need it to survive. So if you aren't given that award, your business might go under. And so in order to keep that alive or keep those task orders running, protesting sometimes is the only way that you can do that to continue revenue streams.
Mr. Alba?
Yeah, I think that's the number one reason. Everything is do or die. And so it's the criticality of the requirement that is probably driving it more than anything else, which is why things like on-ramps or a rolling admission, things like that, I think would greatly lessen that issue.
Okay, I appreciate it. So, Mr. Alba, just to follow up with you is, as we continue to look at this and study, as members of Congress continue to look at this and study, examine federal contracting issues, if there's one thing, and it's probably more than one thing, but if there's one thing we should absolutely focus on, what is it?
Again, I think the big thing is clarity, and clarity in the regulations, and probably reducing the discretion of contracting officers in the process, because that allows contracting officers to do things without any rhyme or reason. Like, for instance, requesting reconsideration of small business status after, like, you're a year into the procurement, they've submitted proposals maybe a year ago, you're still evaluating. You suddenly ask for recertification for some option or some amendment, and then people who submitted a year ago are no longer small. They wasted all those dollars and they're thrown in the trash.
I appreciate it. I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you. Thank you to all witnesses.
The gentleman yields back. I would like to thank our witnesses again for appearing before the committee today. It is clear from your testimony that government-wide contracts have changed how small firms do business with the federal government. And while its goals are worthy, they are also forcing small contractors out of the marketplace and impeding new entrants. Today's hearing has not only shed light on the significant challenges the small contractors face, but it also has put forward potential solutions. And I just want to raise the issue that this is not, this is an issue that falls also under the jurisdiction of government and oversight. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance policies that ensure small businesses have meaningful ways to contact with the federal government. Without objection, members have 5 legislative days to submit statement and supporting materials for the record. And if there is no further business to come before the committee, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you again.